Hello, everyone. It's Kenneth Oppel. I started these daily read alouds with this book, Silverwing. So it seems fitting that I will wrap it all up with another reading from Silverwing. What I thought I would do is carry on from the point where I left you in that very first reading. So, as you may recall, Shade, the runt of the Silverwing colony, has decided he's going to see the sun rise. And this is a very dangerous thing to do because in my world, the sun is something that is forbidden to the bats. Because during a great battle millions of years ago, the bats were punished by both the birds and the beasts and robbed of the sunlight. So they can't see the sun when it's in the sky. So Shade says, I'm going to go take a peek at it. And he's doing this really to try and get even with Chinook, who's sort of the alpha male of the newborns. Chinook is big and strong, confident and arrogant. Shade quietly despises him, and not so quietly. And so Shade invites Chinook to come along and see the sun. Shade knows Chinook is frightened, but Chinook really has to go to save face. Here's what happens. I know this is just some stupid game, said Chinook as they flew through the forest, away from Tree Haven. We'll see who backs down first, Shade. Shade had to push himself to keep up, and it irritated him. He was always having to flap harder, try harder, so he wouldn't fall behind. He hated the easy pump of Chinook's wings, but watched carefully, trying to copy it. We'll go to the top of that hill, Shade said, hoping he didn't sound out of breath. We'll see the sun quicker there. What do you think? Chinook just grunted distractedly, then said, What about the owls? Was that a note of worry in his voice? Shade felt encouraged. Just stick close to the trees, he said. They won't even see us. Another grunt from Chinook. Shade could see birds beginning to stir in their nests and on their perches, joining in on the dawn chorus, puffing out their feathers. Sleeping birds were such a normal part of his nighttime world, but he'd never seen many awake, and now a few sang out in surprise as he and Chinook darted past. They reached the summit and roosted at the tip of the highest tree, pressed close against the trunk for cover. The long valley curved before them, an unbroken canopy of trees, except for the one dusty human road cutting through. Shade had never seen anything on it, not a human, not one of their noisy vehicles. They were a long way from most things, his mother always said. The dawn chorus was building now, rising up all around them. What do you want to see the sun for anyway? Chinook asked. I just want to see it. What for? I'm curious, said Shade. Aren't you? A slight pause. No. Another pause. What if it turns us to dust? It doesn't turn anything else to dust, said Shade. He was enjoying this. Chinook was actually listening to him for a change, and it was almost as if he needed reassurance. My mother told a story about a bat, said Chinook. All his wings and bones and teeth, just a pile of dust. Just a story, said Shade. But he felt a twist of fear in his own stomach. Let's go back, said Chinook after a moment. We can tell the others we saw it. We'll keep it secret, okay? Shade considered this. Here was Chinook, asking him for something. It was certainly pleasant, this feeling of power. Go ahead, said Shade. He would not leave. He wanted his victory without any compromise. The sky was very bright in the east now, brighter than he'd ever seen it. He squinted, with the faint, whispery pain behind his eyes. What if the stories were right? What if it did blind him? Not much longer, he muttered. Chinook shifted on the branch, wings rustling against the bark. Shh. Shade hissed at him. Over there. He tilted his chin. An owl sat stone still in a nearby tree, half hidden behind a screen of leaves. You're not afraid, are you? Shade whispered at Chinook. A strong bat has nothing to be afraid of. Shade was afraid. But he didn't think the owl had seen them. Even if it had, he knew it wasn't allowed to attack them until the sun had actually risen. It was the law. He doubted Chinook knew this, though, since it wasn't the kind of thing mothers told the newborns. The only reason Shade knew was he'd overheard his own mother talking with some of the colony elders when she thought he was asleep. It was about the only good thing about being a runt. When he was younger, he'd been carried everywhere with her, even to special meetings. For the adults, he'd picked up a lot of things that way. A dreadful hooting noise emanated from the owl's throat, making Shade's fur lift. Then, with a flurry, the owl lit from the branch and flew across the sky, its wings pumping silently. Shade let out his breath. I can't, said Chinook, and he dropped from the branch, pounding his way fast back toward Tree Haven. Shade watched him disappear into the foliage. He felt strangely disappointed and didn't know why. He could go now too. He'd won. But it wasn't enough. He wanted something more, and it surprised him. He genuinely wanted to see the sun, this thing that they were absolutely forbidden. Across the valley, a band of white light spread from the tree line. He was surprised how long all this was taking. Half the sky was already pale gray, and still no sun? What was it doing? Shade blinked, turned away, and found himself staring straight at a wall of dense feathers. He looked up into the huge hooded eyes of an owl perched at the edge of its branch. Without a sound, Shade pressed himself deep against the bark, but he knew he'd been spotted. They were so quiet, an owl's wings. They could sneak up on you. The owl's eyes held on him, and then the massive horned head swiveled eerily to the bright horizon, checking for the sun. Shade let his echo vision creep across the owl, taking a good, long look. The thick feathers cloaking ferocious strength, the wickedly hooked beak that could rip through flesh in a second, and he knew it didn't even need its eyes to see him. Like him, all owls had echo vision too. He stared, hating the owl. No bat could kill an owl. They were giants, 5 times as big, maybe more. He should have been more afraid. He was smaller. But he could go places it couldn't. Between tight gaps in branches, he could fold himself into a crevice. In a tree's trunk, he could make himself invisible almost against bark. There was a sudden rush of air behind him, and there was his mother, hovering. "Fly," she hissed. "Now!" Her voice was so urgent and so angry, he followed her instantly. Down the hill they plunged, hugging the tree line. He looked back over his wing and saw the owl following at a distance, its gigantic wings swinging leisurely. The sun had not yet broken the horizon. They flew over the creek, and the owl was still there. Shade felt a sudden warmth on his wings and looked. They shone brightly. The sun. "Into the trees!" Ariel cried over her wing. "Shade, don't look back!" Shade looked. A tiny sliver of the sun had cleared the horizon, spilling dazzling light into the valley. It was so powerful, so intense, it sucked the breath right out of him, and he had to close his eyes tight. He locked onto his mother with his echo vision and followed her as she plunged below the tree line. The rank smell of the owl crashed over him as its claws whistled past his tail, nearly piercing his wings. He was down among the trees now, and all around him the birds were rising and setting up a terrible shriek. Weaving crazily through the foliage, he pushed himself hard to keep up with his mother. At last, they burst into the clearing. But so did the owl, who had been following from above the trees. It dropped toward them like a hailstone. Shade and his mother rolled in opposite directions to avoid its claws, then came together again, streaking toward the mighty gnarled branches of Tree Haven, through the knothole and into the safe darkness inside. And that is the end of Chapter 1 of my book, Silverwing. I've really enjoyed doing these, reading aloud every day. I hope you have too. I loved being read aloud to when I was young, and I still love being read aloud to. And it's fun to read aloud too for my own books. I feel sort of reconnected to my stories, some of which I really haven't read in years, even decades. So it's been a treat for me. Thank you for tuning in and listening. All right. Stay healthy and well.